Leonora Baird pressed both hands against the cold glass of the limousine window and told her driver to stop. Edmund did not ask why. In 31 years of service he had learned that when Leonora Baird used that voice, quiet, flat, stripped of everything except certainty, you stopped the car. You did not ask questions, you simply stopped. They were on Bloor Street West, on a Tuesday morning in late October, the kind of morning that carried the smell of Lake Ontario and coming snow. The sidewalk outside the car was crowded with Yorkville shoppers and office workers, cutting through with their collars up and their heads down, moving with the practiced urgency of people who had somewhere better to be. Leonora did not see any of them. She saw only the young woman standing outside St. Andrew's community kitchen in a stained canvas apron, stacking empty milk crates beside the service door, with the efficient movements of someone who had done the same task 1,000 times, without once being thanked for it. Around the woman's neck on a simple cord hung a ring. A gold signet ring, heavy and old-fashioned, turning once in the gray October light as she moved. Leonora could not read the engraving from this distance. She did not need to. She had held that ring in her own hands 22 years ago, in a jeweler's workshop 2 blocks from where she now sat, and she had watched the man press a maple leaf crest and 2 initials, PB, into the gold herself. She had paid for it in cash, carried it home wrapped in velvet, placed it in a box on Patrick's pillow the morning of his 32nd birthday. It had been made for one person, her son. That ring, Leonora said, barely above a whisper, belongs to my son. She was already opening the car door before Edmund had fully stopped. The young woman heard the door and turned. She had the kind of face that had learned early to read approaching situations. Not fearful exactly, but calibrated. She took 1 step back from the crates. Not running, just making room, the way a person outs when they have spent enough years in enough difficult moments to know that creating distance is not the same as creating safety, but it is something. That ring, Leonora said, reaching the sidewalk. Her voice was steadier than her hands. Where did you get it? The young woman looked down at the cord around her neck, then up. My father left it to me, she said. Her voice was even watchful. He died 3 years ago. Your father? I didn't steal it. Her chin came up slightly, not aggressive, just precise. The statement of someone who has been accused of taking things they did not take and has become very tired of it. From the idling car the rear window rolled down. Aldous Fenn leaned out. He was 52 years old, groomed with the particular precision that requires both money and daily effort, and he had been Leonora's nephew by marriage and the acting CEO of Baird Properties for 9 of the past 12 years. He wore his authority the way he wore his suits, expensively and as though born to it. Aunt Leonora, he said. His voice carried the warmth of a man who had spent decades learning that tone could substitute for sincerity. This is not the place. Leonora did not turn to him. She says her father left it to her. People say a great many things on Bloor Street. He opened the car door and stepped out, buttoning his jacket in a single practiced motion. He looked at the young woman with a blankness so managed it barely resembled an expression at all. Not contempt, not quite, but something more controlled. The assessment of a man accustomed to removing complications without getting his hands visibly dirty. The ring is a piece of family property. If it's made its way to you by any means, the appropriate channel is the police. The young woman's jaw tightened. She did not answer. Her shoulders shifted. A small involuntary bracing, the kind that has been learned through years of being told that your account of your own life is not sufficient evidence of your own life. Leonora finally turned to Aldous. No police, she said. Leonora. I said no. She looked back at the young woman. The October wind moved between them. A streetcar groaned past on the tracks close enough to feel. Will you come with me? To speak privately? You are under no obligation. You can walk away right now and I won't stop you. The young woman studied her for a long moment. She looked at Aldous, she looked back at Leonora, and something in what she saw there. Not wealth, not power, but a quality that sat behind both of those things, older and quieter and far more costly, made her nod. All right, she said. I'll come. Her name was Cressida Malone. She told Leonora this in the car, seated across from her in the dark leather interior that smelled of polished wood and the kind of cleanliness that is itself a form of wealth. She told it carefully, the way a person offers their name when they are not yet certain it will be received with care. She sat with her apron still tied, and her hands folded in her lap, and she looked at the neighborhood change outside the window as they moved east through Yorkville. The storefronts growing more discreet, the trees taller, the sidewalks wider and emptier and quieter in the way of places where people have bought the right not to be crowded. She had the expression of someone watching another world from a train window. Interested, not envious. Simply very clear-eyed about the distance. Tell me about your father, Leonora said. Cressida looked at her hands. He wasn't around when I was young. My mother raised me in Hamilton. She got sick when I was 16 and died when I was 19. She said this without particular emphasis, the way facts get said when they have been carried long enough to lose their sharpest edges. After she died he found me, I don't know how. He just appeared at the door of my apartment one afternoon. He looked terrible. Thin. He'd been sleeping in shelters, working odd jobs. But he came. She stopped. When she continued her voice was lower. He stayed for 6 months and then his heart gave out. The hospital in Hamilton called me because I was the only name he'd written down anywhere. Aldous spoke from the front seat without turning around. What was his name? Peter Moore. She touched the ring through the cord at her throat, a small habitual gesture, the kind worn smooth by repetition. Pete. That's what everyone called him. And he gave you the ring before he died. I found it after, in a box of his things from transitional housing, wrapped in a piece of flannel. A pause. He mentioned it once. He said it had been his before. He said it like there was more behind the words, but he never found a way to get to it. Aldous said nothing further. But in the front seat his posture changed in a way that Leonora, watching him in the mirror, registered without letting show. The Baird house sat at the end of a long curved driveway in Rosedale, behind stone gateposts that had stood since Leonora's husband was a boy. The garden in autumn had the austere elegance of a thing that trusted time. Cressida stepped out of the car and looked up at the house with the frank assessment of someone who has learned to observe things clearly rather than be impressed by them. Inside, Odette Kimura brought tea on a silver tray and set it on the low table without comment or ceremony. Odette had been Leonora's personal assistant for 27 years. She had the steadiness of someone who had seen a great deal happen in this house and had formed her own careful opinions about most of it. Leonora opened the family album to a photograph of Patrick at 34, the summer before the accident. He was standing on the dock at the Georgian Bay cottage, laughing at something off to the side of the frame, his white linen shirt open at the collar, the late afternoon sun landing across his face. His right hand rested on the dock railing. The ring was visible on his finger, catching the light. Leonora held the album out to Cressida. Cressida looked at it. She looked for a long time, the kind of looking that is not recognition, so much as the slow assembling of something already known from pieces that did not previously touch, the jaw, the way the shoulders carried themselves, the particular angle of amusement in his expression, as though the joke were on everyone equally, and he found that genuinely funny rather than bitter. She set down her tea, she pressed one hand flat against her sternum, just above the cord, and she said very quietly, "That's him." The room contracted. Aldous, standing at the fireplace, spoke into the silence. A resemblance, nothing conclusive. His voice had the careful evenness of a man tightening a grip. People resemble one another. It means nothing without. His name was Patrick, Cressida said. She was not speaking to Aldous. Leonora held her gaze. Patrick Baird, my only son? He disappeared 9 years ago in a boating accident bay during a September storm. The search ran for 72 hours. They recovered debris, a life jacket, some effects from the boat. She stopped. They never found him. Cressida was still looking at the photograph. He had a scar, she said, half to herself, on his left forearm. He told me it was from a propeller. He said he couldn't remember exactly how it happened. He said a lot of things he couldn't remember exactly. No one spoke. Outside, a wind pushed through the Rosedale maples, and the sound of it reached the room like water over stones. Leonora reached across the table and took Cressida's hand. Cold, she held it. I want to arrange a DNA test, she said. A proper Tory-certified chain of custody documented, both of us consenting. I am not asking you to prove anything to me. I can see things already that don't require science. Her voice was steady and very clear, but I want certainty. For both of us. Aldous straightened. Leonora, I strongly advise against any precipitous. Then advise it quietly and to someone else. She did not raise her voice. She simply turned and looked at him until he stopped talking. Then she turned back to Cressida. Will you agree to the test? Yes, Cressida's answer came without hesitation. I want to know too. Aldous left the house at 4:30. Leonora watched him go from the sitting room window. The precise clip of his walk. The phone already at his ear before he reached the gate. The slight tightening of his shoulders that he would not have been aware of but that told her something she had not yet let herself name. Odette came to stand beside her. He was involved in the search coordination, Odette said. It was not offered as judgment. It was offered the way evidence is offered by someone who has been waiting for the right moment to place it down. Very involved in the decision to end it. Leonora looked at her. I know you kept records. Odette met her eyes. I kept them because something about the timing didn't settle in me. And I didn't know what to do with that except to make sure the paper still existed. A pause. I'll get them. They drove to Hamilton the following morning. Leonora, Cressida and Odette, in a car that bore no company name, with a driver Leonora trusted and Aldous did not know. The shelter on James Street North was a brick building with a painted mural along its side wall. A hand-woven sign in the window. and a front desk staffed by a woman named Patricia, who had worked there for 14 years and remembered the people who passed through with the kind of specific tenderness that comes from paying real attention. Leonora placed the photograph of Patrick on the counter. Patricia looked at it. Her expression moved through several things before it settled. "We called him Pete," she said finally. "Pete Moore. He was with us off and on for about 2 years. Before he moved to transitional housing on the east side." She looked between Leonora and Cressida and chose her words with care. "He had a head injury. You could tell. There were places he'd reach for and find nothing. He was quiet about it. He never made it anyone else's problem." She folded her hands on the counter. "He was a gentleman, very polite. He held the door for people. He remembered everyone's coffee order. The kind of person who takes up less space than they should." Leonora's eyes were very bright. She did not trust herself to speak. "He died 3 years ago," Cressida said, "at the General." Patricia nodded slowly. "I heard we lit a candle for him here." She looked down at the photograph again. "Was he someone important?" "He was my son," Leonora said. The medical records took 3 days to arrive through the hospital's archive process, obtained through a lawyer who knew exactly which offices to call and in what order. When the documents came, they told the story plainly, in the careful shorthand of emergency medicine. An unidentified male admitted to Hamilton General 9 years ago, 1 week after the Georgian Bay accident, with severe cranial trauma, waterlogged clothing and no identification. He had been brought in by a woman who found him on a trail near Barrie, barely conscious, unable to state his name. The admitting notes described a man who could speak, could reason, could follow a question, but who had no access to his own past. The clinical term was retrograde amnesia, significant, possibly permanent. He had been treated for 5 days. When no one came for him, he had signed himself out under a name he had produced when asked who he was. Peter Moore. Perhaps a teacher. Perhaps simply 2 words his fractured mind found when it reached for something to hold. Cressida sat with the documents in her lap in a conference room at the lawyer's office and read them twice. Her hands were very still, the stillness of effort. "He was alive," she said. "The accident was on a Thursday. He was admitted to Hamilton General the following Wednesday." She looked up. "The search ended on Sunday." Leonora closed her eyes. Odette placed the printed email thread on the table beside the medical file. 3 pages of correspondence, she had kept in a folder labeled with nothing but the year. The final message in the chain was a reply sent from a private account to the search coordinator. Formal, efficient, thanking him for his diligence and confirming that the family had accepted the findings, that the search would be discontinued, that outstanding costs would be covered by the estate. The email had been sent by Aldous Fenn. It had been sent 39 hours before the search officially ended, before the inland trails along the Georgian Bay coast were fully covered, before the trail near Barrie where a woman walking her dog had found a man face down in the mud, breathing. The room held very still. "He didn't know Patrick had survived," Odette said carefully. "He ended the search because the odds were low and because it served him for Patrick to be gone. The company was mid-transition. Patrick had been planning changes. If he came back, if there was a child, if there was any claim." "Everything changed," Leonora said. The words came out hollow. "If Patrick was found, if Patrick had a daughter." She looked at Cressida. Cressida looked back at her, and in that look was the full weight of 9 years. A man living in shelters with no name, a child growing up with no father, a mother lighting candles in a church every year on a Thursday in September, and behind all of it, very carefully placed, a decision made by a man who stood to inherit everything if the right people stayed lost. The DNA results arrived on a Thursday morning. Leonora was in the library. Odette brought the envelope in on a small tray as if it were correspondence, which it was. The most important correspondence Leonora had received in 9 years. Cressida sat in the chair by the window. She had, without anyone making a formal decision about it, simply continued to be in the house over the days of waiting. She slept in the guest room and appeared at breakfast and helped Odette sort through the documents in the evenings, and Leonora did not suggest she leave and Cressida did not suggest it herself. They had arrived at a tacit understanding that some things should not be rushed. Leonora opened the envelope herself. She read the single page. She read it again. She folded it along its original creases with deliberate hands, the way a person handles a thing they have waited a long time to receive. Then she looked at Cressida. "My granddaughter," she said. 2 words. But the weight inside them, 9 years of silence, compressed, made Cressida press her hands flat against her knees, and stare at the floor and breathe through her nose, very slowly with the concentration of someone who has held themselves together through everything, and knows instinctively that this is the moment it will cost something to remain upright. She had not cried in Hamilton. She had not cried in the car on the way back, or in the evenings sorting documents, or in the nights lying in the guest room listening to the Rosedale trees. She had carried the whole of it, her father's unmade life, his 9 years of not knowing, the particular cruelty of surviving without the language to explain what you had survived. And she had carried it steadily. She cried now, not loudly, not the way grief performs itself, the way it releases when it finally has somewhere to go. Leonora crossed the room and held Cressida's face in both hands. She looked at her for a long moment, the way a person looks at something they thought they had lost so completely, that finding it again seems to require a kind of permission from the past. "You look like him," she said, "around the eyes, when you stop being careful." Aldous Fenn did not shout when the board convened. That was what struck Leonora most, that even then, even at the end of it, he maintained his composure as though composure were a form of defense. He sat in the chair at the head of the table, his head of the table, the seat he had occupied for 9 years. And he looked at the documents spread before the board and he said that this was a misreading of the circumstances. He said it as though calm were sufficient armor. "The search coordinator confirmed the likelihood of survival was near zero," he said. "I made a difficult decision under difficult circumstances. I acted in the best interest of the family at a time of profound uncertainty." "You acted in the best interest of your position," Leonora said. He looked at her, and for one instant, one moment when the management slipped, the face beneath the face showed itself. "Patrick would have come back and dismantled everything I built," he said, quietly, almost reasonably. As though that were an explanation and not a confession. 9 years of work, the restructuring, the portfolio he would have walked back in and... "He was your cousin by marriage," Leonora said. "By 20 years of holidays in this house, of family dinners, of being welcomed at every table we set, and you ended the search for him while he was still alive." Her voice did not waver. "He spent 9 years in shelters with no name. He died in a hospital not knowing who he was. His daughter grew up without a father and aged out of foster care, and has been working in a community kitchen on Bloor Street. And she is the most honest person I have sat across a table from in 9 years. She paused. You will not say another word in my presence about what you built." The board removed Aldous Fenn by unanimous vote before noon. What followed was thorough and slow and very public, the way proceedings tend to be when the evidence has been preserved carefully in a folder kept by a woman with steady hands, and a sense of justice that had waited patiently for its moment. The ring was resized to fit Cressida's finger at the same jewelry workshop on Bloor Street, where it had been made. The jeweler who had made the original had retired, but his daughter remembered the commission. She looked at the engraving inside the band and looked at Cressida and did not say anything except that she would have it ready by Thursday. Cressida offered to give the ring back more than once in the first weeks after, with the particular generosity of someone who has learned not to expect things to last. Each time Leonora told her no. "It was made for a Baird," Leonora said. "It is exactly where it belongs." Some mornings Leonora would find Cressida in the library in the chair by the window. She would not announce herself. She would stand in the doorway and look at her granddaughter, reading the morning light coming in across the old wood floor, the Rosedale garden bare and gray beyond the glass, and in those moments she would see, briefly and without warning, a quality she recognized. Not Patrick's face exactly, but something that lived behind the face, some essential thing that had survived a boating accident on Georgian Bay and 9 years without a name and 31 years of foster care and grief and flower-dusted mornings stacking crates on Bloor Street. Something that had survived everything, that had been done to make it disappear. There are people the world learns not to look at, not always out of cruelty, sometimes simply out of the quiet habit of not seeing what is inconvenient to see. They stand on sidewalks outside community kitchens. They carry things no one ever asks about. They hold, without knowing it, the pieces that other people have spent years breaking themselves searching for, the pieces that were declared lost because someone powerful needed them to stay that way. Look anyway. The truth has a way of wearing whatever it can find. A cord around a neck, a ring on a chain, a face in a doorway that asks nothing of you except that you stop the car. If this story stayed with you, leave your thoughts below. And if you have ever been the person no one looked at twice, we see you. Subscribe to Echoes of Promise, because the next story may be the one that reminds someone they were never forgotten.